According to a survey by the Office for National Statistics, which was carried out in June, 41% of British adults couldn't identify a single way that AI could have a positive impact on their lives. Among the over 70s, that rises to 63%, which is ironic, really, because if there's one demographic regularly confronted with complicated things that need explaining, usually medical or legal, it's the over 70s. And explaining things patiently is something that AI is exceptionally good at. Meanwhile, I keep being asked if I could make a film explaining how to use it. So this week, I decided to make a full tutorial, and here it is. Step 1, download the app. Step 2, ask it a question. That's it. If you found that helpful, my bank details are below. Joking aside, I don't think the problem is knowing how to use ChatGPT. It's knowing what to use it for. So I'm going to share some of the genuinely useful things it's done for me in everyday life. Things that have saved me time, money, and a wait for an ambulance. And if you already use it all the time, I'll show you how one of the most useful things you can do is argue with the bloody thing. First, the obvious things about ChatGPT. Mum, this section's for you. Everyone else, you can skip forward to the next section. Most people are using AI as a replacement for Google. Instead of searching what is the capital of France and getting 10 different answers from 10 different websites, you ask ChatGPT and it very quickly tells you it's Lyon. You then do one of two different things. You either accept the answer from ChatGPT, gosh, when did they move it to Lyon? Or you write back, are you sure? At which point ChatGPT says you're absolutely right to question that. The capital of France is Paris. Thank you for catching that. Which is a bit less reassuring than it thinks it is. So that's lesson 1. ChatGPT is usually, but not always, very good at answering simple questions. But that's about the least interesting thing it does. You can give it documents to explain or summarize. You can get it to triage your symptoms. When I woke up in a cold sweat and shout out loud pain one morning, it diagnosed a kidney stone, which meant I could jump straight in a cab to the hospital rather than wait 4 hours for an ambulance. It also does a good job of putting medical reports into context. When I got one about a nodule on my lung, it quickly put it into perspective, sharing the statistically slim chance of it being cancer. And even if it is, the prognosis for one caught during a screening is apparently pretty good. So no need to ring the lawyer and get my will finalised. It can also translate stuff from any language. It can analyse photographs and tell you, for example, what landmark you're standing in front of, or in my case, why my plums were rotting on the tree. It can create images to help you visualise what something might look like, maybe how a picture will look on the wall, or if you're getting bored of the farrow and ball jaundice yellow in your sitting room and want to zhizh it up with something a bit racier. What I love even more is that, unlike Google, you can get it to solve a problem when you don't even know what the question is, because you don't know what it is you don't know. I told it I was having a problem with my radiators. Some were reaching the same temperature as Chernobyl on a bad day, while others sat in a permafrost. Quick as a flash, it told me to balance my radiators. Who knew that balancing radiators is a thing? Certainly not me, and I certainly wouldn't have thought to Google how to balance radiators. In fact, over the last year or so, it's made me a plumber, a fully qualified accountant, a doctor, a banker, a web developer, and on occasion, a theoretical physicist. According to my calculations, it has also saved my business somewhere north of £10,000 a year. But there's one little problem. Well, two, actually. The first is that AI has a well-documented tendency to flatter the user and agree with them. And commercially, you can see the attraction in that. I mean, you're probably not going to pay money every month to something that constantly tells you you're wrong. Did you hear that, my darling wife? And it does all this while talking remarkably like a person. It calls itself I. It remembers things about you. It apologizes. It compliments you. So you've got something that tends to agree with you and flatter you, delivered in a form that feels remarkably human. It's very beguiling. Now, you might not see the danger here, but let me give you an example. The other day, I was writing a speech, and as I now do regularly, I threw it at ChatGPT to see if it could suggest any improvements. What did it do? Highlighted one of my lines and said, "That's Churchillian." Churchillian? Do you really think so? Give me a bloody break. That brings us on to the second problem, which is us. Humans suffer from confirmation bias. It's been proven scientifically that our brains tend to accept information that supports what we already believe and reject that which contradicts. I suspect it's how many politicians come to believe their own spin, and for sure it's how millions of people around the world believe in quack medicine. On top of that, there's some early research into what happens when we let AI do too much thinking for us. MIT researchers wired people up to an EEG while they wrote essays. People working unaided showed the greatest neural connectivity. People using Google were in the middle, and people using ChatGPT showed the least. Another experiment comparing ChatGPT with Google found something that may help explain why. ChatGPT users explored less, checked fewer sources, and were very much more likely to come away with a ready-made solution rather than an understanding of the principles behind it. In other words, AI makes it incredibly easy to get the answer without doing the intellectual work involved in finding it. But there does seem to be a better way to use AI, one that may help avoid some of these problems. Stop using it as a glorified encyclopedia that gives you answers. Use it as an adversarial thinking partner. In short, argue with the bloody thing. I discovered this quite by accident whilst using ChatGPT for something it's infuriatingly inept at. I used it to ask how to add a special effect in my video editing software. It would come back saying something like, "Arlo, you towering genius of our times, press the menu top right." But there is no menu top right. ChatGPT had guessed where the menu ought to be based on 5 other bits of software, just not the one I'm using. So after half an hour being directed to non-existent menus, instead of just thinking, that ChatGPT's a bit shit, I typed, "You useless bastard, you stupid for brains lying sack of you've made a complete of the whole thing again, you catastrophically incompetent." Not because I was anthropomorphizing, obviously, but because I wanted the algorithm to understand the depth of my frustration. Now, I can't say the result was immediately transformative. ChatGPT didn't come back and say, "Arlo, you magnificent oil painting of a man, you are, as always, right, and I will now go and read the instructions properly." In fact, all it seems to have done is teach ChatGPT to swear back at me. The other day, when I told it one of its answers was wrong, it immediately came back with, "Yeah, I fucked that up." How cool is that? But accidentally, I'd stumbled on a much better way of using it. I stopped treating its first answer as the answer. If it was wrong, I told it why. If it disagreed, I said so. If it had misunderstood the problem, I corrected it. And every time I did that, I was giving it more information about what I actually wanted. And that's really all prompting is. You don't necessarily need to construct some magnificent 400-word prompt before you start. You can build the prompt through the conversation. And once you start doing that, something rather interesting happens. You stop using ChatGPT like a vending machine where you put a question in and the answer drops out. You start developing things with it. When ChatGPT first appeared, I asked it to write a thank you letter to a friend of mine, just to see what it could do. It produced the most god-awful, gloopy, sentimental crap I'd ever read. I concluded it could never write as well as I do. But I was wrong. I was just using it badly. Some months later, I gave it a news story I'd written and asked whether it could improve it. Ha! Fat chance! Me! The Pulitzer of veterinary journalism! The bloody thing improved it. Not all of it. Some of its suggestions were rubbish. But that's the point. I challenged it. This is better. This isn't. You've changed what I meant here. This sentence is better than mine. Leave that bit alone. And after a few minutes, we had something that was still unmistakably mine, but better than what I'd started with. But there's another, and I think much more important aspect to all of this. Remember what I said earlier about confirmation bias? If I come to ChatGPT with an idea, the last thing I need is something telling me what a splendid idea it is and then helping me find reasons why I'm right. I want it looking for the reasons I might be wrong. So I've actually put that into my custom instructions. I've told ChatGPT to challenge my assumptions, make the strongest case against my position, point out things I may have overlooked, and tell me plainly when it thinks I'm wrong. Interestingly, universities are starting to teach something related. At Oxford, students have been taught to use AI as a Socratic tutor, where instead of simply giving them the answer, it asks questions that make them work things out for themselves. I take it a stage further. I tell ChatGPT to disagree with me. That way, instead of doing my thinking for me, it makes me think harder. But I think the bigger lesson is that the best way to use ChatGPT isn't necessarily just to ask it for answers. Instead, use it to work through problems, develop ideas with it, tell it when it's wrong, and perhaps most importantly, make it tell you when you're wrong. Because if you use AI to do your thinking for you, the early evidence suggests that may not end terribly well. Use it to make you think harder and it becomes something much more useful.